you. I thought I could too.
Both thriller and horror are difficult genres to deal with in serialized media, as it is difficult to keep a mystery going on for too long without losing the interest of the viewer, or adding plot twist after plot twist to the point where it becomes a chaotic mess. Which is why it's mostly reserved for shorter formats, such as Junji Ito's one-shot mangas or movies like Perfect Blue. Even then, you can see new franchises pop up from time to time, both in manga and animation, to varying degrees of success. Which is what brings us here today. For the wrong reason. Again.
I want to die.
Another, like other series we're going to talk about, is an anime that got a lot of attention during its time due to the shock value of seeing all these beautifully drawn characters dying in multiple ways, with low chances of survival in a plot that takes one back to the Final Destination series of movies. Our story starts in Yomiyama, clever name I know, where we learn of Yomiyama High Class 3-3, and how it became cursed to have its students and their close one die each year due to the existence of an extra student in the class. There's another. Our protagonist arrives and slowly uncovers this mystery, and how to stop the calamity. Sort of. Let's explore how mysterious this story actually is. The work of the art department is the most striking part of the anime. One can say that there's not much to talk about when looking at good animation, but I find it necessary to mention, if only to give credit to PA Works, a studio that always delivers on this front. There's proper use of lights and shadows, alongside a nice variety of moving shots and CG that, while simple, looks really good for its time. This is especially noticeable during some of the death scenes, being brutally fluid in their portrayal, although I'm not gonna spoil them, as it's better for you to experience it yourselves. Audio-wise, the anime is very hit or miss, more specifically in the sound design aspect. On one hand, there's good use of added effects on the voices and other sound effects to make them fit with the atmosphere, such as adding a light echo to a conversation happening in a hallway. On the other, it seems like they felt the need to add this ear-piercing sound whenever they tried to build a little tension. Which shouldn't be bad by itself. The problem is that it happens so often that sometimes it's just used as a fake-out, attempting to build tension where there is none. I find this last aspect comparable to a love track in a TV sitcom.
Are you undergoing psychiatric treatment?
It's there to entice an emotion in you, since nothing happening on screen would elicit a response otherwise. That being said, the soundtrack, while not particularly memorable as a whole, does a good job when setting a tone for the scenes, although sadly this aspect is overshadowed by the sound just mentioned. Finally, it's the voice work, which is quite nice. The emotions are conveyed appropriately and the cast fit their characters, not much to add there. That's pretty much the best features of another. As you can see, there were no mentions of the mystery in the positives. Well...
It feels like another has some sort of identity crisis. Sometimes it wants to be a horror and mystery show, then it has some glimpses of slice of life, but ends up becoming a slasher and drama, harming the rhythm and scope of the narrative as a result. The first episodes of the anime build up a sense of mystery and horror surrounding the city and its inhabitants. The first encounter between Koichi and Mei is unsettling, aided by the usage of music and appealing visuals, and the interactions between the protagonist and his classmates feel uncomfortable and awkward, giving a sense of there's more than meets the eye. There were also some dull transitions, which were genuinely creepy. This style is kept for around 4 episodes, until it is revealed that Misaki was a normal girl and not some sort of ghost. From this point onward, the horror aspect of the show suddenly disappears, as it mostly focuses on trying to identify the another, making the anime a mystery show for the most part, aside from the mandatory deaths in most episodes. Finally, we have the final arc of the show, in which the anime goes full slasher, killing almost every student in the class, and adding some drama among the students to spice things up a bit more.
Yeah, boy.
This transition felt jarring, more considering that basically nothing happened during the first 4 episodes, aside from the unsettling aura. So then, we get a huge exposition dump explaining what should have been presented during the first episodes. After that, during the second half of the show, we have Koichi's party trying to find a solution to the problem, but the final destination like scenes get in the way sometimes. Not to mention that part of the investigation felt like filler anyway. The cherry on the top is the final arc, which, while I enjoy it, went full Resident Evil 4 with everyone trying to kill each other just because a mentally unstable character drove the class into madness. This lack of focus ended up harming the narrative greatly. Mixing genres is not a bad thing if done correctly, but I initially expected horror and mystery, but ended up in disappointment. Then, the supposed mystery show had the mandatory beach episode because that's what other animes do, even if it doesn't fit at all with the premise. In addition to some bonding and interaction between the cast, to finally simply focus on the graphical death scenes, which was one of the selling points of the show anyway.
While the characters from another had some interesting tidbits and layers to them, their decisions are tremendously stupid, harming the narrative and the enjoyment from the show. Spoilers ahead. Take Koichi's classmates, for example. They know about the curse and plan the countermeasures ahead, which would ensure their survival. However, instead of warning the protagonist about the curse, they let him talk with Rei constantly. Then, they discuss the necessity of telling Koichi about the curse to simply do nothing yet again. Izumi was the one in charge of the countermeasures against the curse, but despite having several chances to stop the protagonist from poking around, she simply complained and did nothing as well. At this point in the show, Rei and Koichi are most likely the catalyst of the curse, so instead of trying to ensure their own safety by alerting the protagonist, they did nothing, for some reason. Another similar situation happens when looking for a solution to stop the calamity during the second half. Koichi's friends gather around to discuss their new lead, but instead of giving it the highest priority, considering that they would even be the next victim, they decide to have a stupid discussion because they had other stuff to do, or because going at certain times of day would be a hassle because reasons. Then, after literally stating that they do not want to involve more people on the issue, the first thing that they do is to tell what they are going to do to the first classmates that they encounter. This simple slip of the mouth would trigger several dumb scenes later in the show, like the massacre in the final arc. If that was not bad enough, after finding a cassette which explains the method to stop the curse, they break the tape just before listening to the solution itself. This simple scene triggered me so hard that it completely killed any remaining faith that I had for the characters, as I could not believe that a group of people whose their lives were at stake were fooling around most of the show and taking awful and stupid decisions so frequently.
Probably the worst plot twist comes from Misaki, who literally killed the mystery of the show. Now that the group knew that they must kill the another in order to stop the curse, it is revealed, only at the end of the anime, that Rei had the ability to identify dead people with her doll's eye. The coolest part is that the origin of this ability is never explained. Were you expecting something? She just has it and you're gonna trust her. she could be the another and you wouldn't know she was lying until much later. But having a convenient plot device only relevant now, at the end of the show, isn't the worst problem. The most damning part was that she knew who the another was before the protagonist even arrived at the city. This means that all the mystery, and by extension the series itself, were pretty much pointless, as Rei knew the answer from the very beginning. She then says that she didn't want to talk about it because Miss Mikami or Reiko, because yes, they were the same person, we just didn't know because the anime adaptation didn't make it clear, was dear and close to the protagonist. This makes no sense, as before he arrived, she could have told this information to her classmates, or talk about it with a librarian because they were friends. At no point she tried to convey this information whatsoever. You can say that nobody would have believed her, but if they believed that such a course existed, to the point that they were desperate enough to isolate both protagonists from the class, I think they would trust her words sooner or later. While they didn't know the real solution from the get-go, ignoring the Amogus was a viable alternative according to the lore. So they could have just ignored Miss Mikami, or in desperation, someone would snap and kill her, you know, like in the final arc of the anime. It was stupid enough that during the show, they knew that there was an extra one and they had to do something about it, yet they achieved nothing during several episodes. However, this sudden plot twist totally kills the story, as everything that happened throughout the show could have been avoided from the start, but it wasn't, and for no good reason.
One of the selling points of another is the death scenes. They range from morbid and unsettling to morbidly comical. Thanks to the good visuals and proper use of CGI, various death scenes had an impact on me. A few of them were fucked up in my opinion, leading to very tense situations, although the anime doesn't capitalize on these moments after the initial shock. We do not want to spoil the death scenes for the most part, at least the good ones, but other scenes were so stupid that they could have been in a Looney Tunes cartoon, just without blood and gore. Would you believe that someone died by a lightning strike? Not to mention that the students surrounding the victim had no repercussions whatsoever. Or when these guys opened this door and suddenly... At least we can say that the death scenes, be it good or terrible, were entertaining for the most part. I would say that the overall balance is more good death scenes than bad ones, but this is a bit subjective, and proves our initial theory that Another is Final Destination, the animation, an adaptation of the novelization. Well, but what about the manga? Does it have the same flaws and issues? Well, we were all surprised by the answer, honestly.
It's important to mention that many of these complaints are completely unique to the anime. The manga is almost entirely different outside of the major story elements. Just to keep it brief, Izumi is the main antagonist and a different character altogether. Teshigawara is much more relevant, to the point of being almost a secondary protagonist, and many important story beats from the anime are different or just outright missing. Let's take the climax as an example. In the anime, the whole class hears the contents of the tape and carnage ensues, while in the manga just the main handful hears the tape and the only real casualties are off-screen and coincidental after the temple catches on fire, from an entirely different source. Regardless of the differences though, it is safe to say that the manga has a much better pace than the anime. The mystery and the tension rise steadily as the manga goes on, which kept me engaged the whole way through. There isn't a single chapter after the introduction is done that feels like filler. Once you hit around chapter 5, it only gets more and more tense, and by the last quarter, there's a permanent feeling of uneasiness and tension that could break at the drop of a hat. The manga's strongest point, without a doubt, is the simply amazing art. It truly feels like a bona fide horror manga, even though the story is really more suspenseful than anything. So many pages left me speechless while reading. It's really impressive. The art is striking, bold, and unsettling when it needs to be, and it creates tension through visuals alone. The artist really knows how to make panels that communicate the serious, somber, and sometimes plainly deranged characters and events of the story. It's a joy to read. It's incredible how something as simple as a blank background or obscured facial expressions can convey such an intense sense of dread and sheer horror, and how effectively the artist uses them to aid the story. I'm not usually a fan of horror aesthetics in manga, but I love some of the pages in Another. They're just so good. However, the manga has its own set of issues that, while not crippling to your enjoyment of the series, are still distracting enough to stand out. Most characters have no clear motivation for their actions, or simply do not do anything. Izumi is the main antagonist, and also the only character with any real justification for her actions. Her goal is to avenge her friend's death, and her actions perfectly reflect that. However, other characters have no real reason to do what they do. Koichi is mostly motivated by curiosity, and while that is a valid starting motivation, it barely changes throughout the story, even near the very last arc. It feels like they're always just going with the flow. Every time a major event occurs, the tension and stakes rise, but the actions of the cast stay the same. After the halfway point, it feels the only thing that moves the plot forward is people dying, and not the characters themselves doing anything. Again, except for Izumi. Besides that, some named characters like Yuya and Mizuno are barely in the story at all, and the general plot is the same as the source material, so it has the same problems in that regard, like the series ruining twist and the lack of setup before the climax. Now, the million-dollar question is, does any of this ruin the manga? Possibly for some, but I still believe it can be a fun ride. The twist is probably still the most egregious thing, much like with any other version of the story. But I don't think the flaws of the adaptation will prevent you from having a good time. They certainly didn't for me. I thoroughly enjoyed the experience even with the awful twist and shallow characters. If anything, it's worth a read for the ambience and visuals alone.
Congratulations! 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 Well, let's go with the grading, shall we? Production value. The anime looks beautiful, no questions. The visuals were appealing, the colors matched the atmosphere, and death scenes were properly animated. Voices were alright, but the soundtrack wasn't particularly good, neither were some of the SFX choices. We'll give this one a 4 out of 5, as it is one of the best features of the show. Storytelling. The anime has a strong start, with a pretty good setup and interesting lore. However, the rhythm after the first episodes becomes stale pretty quickly, becoming too slow, stupid, or just plain filler. The fact that Mei knew everything from the get-go severely affected my experience with the show, as it basically kills the entire mystery. There were some interesting plot twists and misleading clues to confuse the viewer, but that doesn't fix everything else. 2 out of 5 here for not being able to capitalize on the initial setup. Characters. Although some of them had interesting interactions and different layers presented throughout the show, their decisions tended to be unrealistic and dumb. It is good that Izumi could be a caring friend while also being manipulative to reach her goals, but it made no sense that she would let a mentally unstable person have a cassette that stated that the another had to die, leading to the final massacre. When characters were not being dumb, they were simply fodder for the death scenes. 2 out of 5, but it's closer to a 3 maybe, as characters have interesting aspects to them despite being a 12-episode anime. But their actions ultimately affected the entire show for the wrong reasons. Enjoyment. Once another became a bit dumb, we didn't take it very seriously. So basically we were laughing at the anime because some decisions and scenes ended up being straight comedy. We didn't have a bad time watching the show at all, but we were mostly amused rather than invested into the story. We will give this one a 3 out of 5 because it wasn't that bad aside from certain episodes, but if you go with the flow and simply enjoy the show, I can see why some people like it more than we did. If you're on that train, a 4 out of 5 will be more accurate, as the anime has appealing visuals and shocking scenes.
We can say with certainty that Another isn't a bad series, but it's not a great one either. In the anime, this can mostly be attributed to the writing of the script being mostly disappointing, mainly by failing to build up tension and shallow character development. Its visuals, although astonishing for the time, can carry the anime by themselves. The manga, as explained earlier, is a different beast altogether. While staying on the same line of amazing artwork and boring characters, the pacing of the story keeps the tension higher for longer, though it still carries the flaws of the source material. It's easy to see how the shock value of the series kickstarted its popularity, but it's equally obvious why this hype didn't last forever. Beautiful characters getting killed can only get you so far before your poor storytelling catches up with you. If anything, both versions, anime and manga, can be enjoyed for their visuals nowadays, but don't go in expecting an engaging narrative.